You've got to remember that at that time, 1666, there was no state of Israel in Palestine. The Jews were dispersed. That was just part of the Ottoman Empire. So they had this idea that the tribes had regathered in Britain and were forming this new Jerusalem in London. Right.
So what is Rosicrucianism then?
What is Rosicrucianism? Well, at its essence, it's a belief in the need to get more knowledge.
Right.
And to do it through scientific inquiry. Right. Not to just accept what's been passed down from Aristotle.
Right.
And really...
Or the Bible.
Anywhere.
Right.
But, the Rosicrucians were very much Bible readers as well. They had a belief that there were two books of the Word of God. One was the Bible, and the other was the Book of Nature. And you needed to read both. So someone like Sir Isaac Newton was a Bible expert, scholar, studied that far more than he did science. But he also studied nature to work out, the various laws and so on. This is really the basis of our modern civilization.
Yeah. And that came from mainland Europe, though?
Well, it was brought to mainland Europe from Britain.
Oh, right, I see.
Initially.
Right.
And I believe there is a connection there going back to Coity and that marriage between Robert Sidney and Barbara Gamage, but that's a whole other subject. I have covered it somewhat in that book.
Right. And you talk about the War of the Roses as well a lot.
Yes.
And how the Welsh were supporting one or other side of that.
Yeah, you need to understand what that's all about, which is about bloodlines.
Right.
You've got to remember that roses, you graft them one onto another. You take a rootstock and then you graft your tea rose, whatever, onto that rootstock. The rootstock would represent one kind of rose. And in fact, generally speaking, we're talking about the Brutus line, right, which is the white rose of York. And then the grafting on can be the red rose of Lancaster, which is bringing in the bloodline of the Norman kings or the English, really. But the Rosicrucians are looking at a third rose, which is the golden rose, Rose of Sharon, which is really the Christ line, the line of the Holy Family. And that's the Grail dynasty and how that weaves in. So when they're fighting the Wars of the Roses, they go into in Shakespeare, you've read this, I'm sure, they go into the garden of the temple and they cut roses and say, I'm for so-and-so, I put the white rose on. And the other one says, oh, I'm for Lancaster, I put the red rose on. Very likely it was the same bush that had some white roses and some red roses on. It's really symbolising the bloodlines.
Right, I see.
And you can go into that, and it's a deep study, believe me, but that's what it's all about.
You just mentioned Shakespeare there.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a book, Sweet Swan of Avon, where he claims that the real author of Shakespeare's plays was a woman called...
Mary Sidney.
Mary Sidney. So, do you go along with that? So Shakespeare didn't write any of his plays?
Duchess of Pembroke.
Yeah.
Well, she was the sister of Sir Robert Sidney and Sir Philip Sidney. She's the one who published Sir Philip Sidney's poems, made him famous. She was probably the most educated woman of her day, with the possible exception of Elizabeth I herself, but even there, there's, who can say. She knew all about court etiquette. She spoke Italian, she spoke French.
So do you think that these Shakespeare plays then, they're like the modern day equivalent of the BBC?
Yeah, well, Shakespeare worked for her.
Yeah.
And her husband. I mean, they were his patrons.
Do you think that the stories and narratives are manipulating the population as to believe in this or that, or? Yeah,
she was basically forming this new society and instructing them in their history, in part, but also these great legends and tales. But I don't believe, I'm sorry, I used to think, well, why didn't Shakespeare write Shakespeare? Come on, don't be so elitist.
Yeah.
But when you go into it in depth, you realise that a lad who'd grown up in, Stratford-on-Avon, just about got a grammar school education, but he doesn't know about a lot of other stuff.
Right.
Is he really going to be know all about, pentameter verse, and is he really going to know all the details of court life in Italy and how things are done?
Right. So at the very least, you would say he was helped.
Very least he was helped.
Right.
I don't say that she wrote everything,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think she was in charge of it all. And because she was a woman, she couldn't publish it under her own name.
All right, that wasn't allowed, was it?
No, it was published after she died. The first folio edition was published by her sons,
Uh-huh.
in a memoriam to her. And the whole thing about Shakespeare, was he gay, because of one of the sonnets, Sweet Swan of Avon, he's talking about his love and for this man.
Yeah, right.
Well, if it's a woman that's writing it, it's rather different, isn't it?
Right, I see, yeah. Yes.
And the Avon actually flowed through her land, not Stratford-on-Avon, but the Hampshire, Wiltshire Avon
Mm-hmm.
flowed through her land. So, and there is actually a picture of her with a big bodice thing with swans on it.
So the Sidney family then, this was very
Critical
friendly with the
family.
royals.
Very close.
And very influential, you think?
Yeah, Henry Sidney, the father of Sir Robert and Sir Philip and so on, he was the playmate of Henry VIII.
Oh, okay. So do you think with this Rosicrucian movement then, were they wanting to give knowledge to the masses? Was that the idea, or were they wanting to keep it elitist so that only certain people have the knowledge? Or?
I don't think they were trying to do that. I think they were trying to raise the level of education. But in those days, that probably did only mean a small segment of society, because the masses basically couldn't read and write,
Yeah.
But they could go to plays. So you could educate them through the theatre.
Uh-huh.
They didn't have television, obviously, but the theatre was very popular.
Right.
So it is one way that you can educate the masses, yeah.
Right. All right. So, is it Coity or Avalon? Are they both the same thing?
Not exactly. The name Avalon, and if you read William of Malmesbury, he goes on about Aval and meaning apple and on being island of apples. But it's got nothing to do with that. Yeah, it actually comes from the name of a guy called Avalac,
Right.
who was either the son or the grandson of a couple who in the Welsh genealogies are called Anna and Belly. Right. Now Anna, if you read the Welsh in the Harleian 3859, which is in the British Library, it will tell you that she was a cousin of the Virgin Mary. Now how can that be? How can she be a cousin of the Virgin Mary? Very simple. If Joseph Arimathea is her brother
Mm-hmm.
or her uncle, then descendants of them are going to be family members. So easy for her to be a cousin of the Virgin Mary. This guy Belly, in the Welsh triads, tells us that there was a prince called Belly who came from the London area. He was the brother of Guiderius, who was killed by the Romans in battle in 43 AD. And he left that area with a retinue of men, and they went and joined Caradog in South Wales to carry on the fight against the Romans.
Mm-hmm.
So these, and they're praised in the triads because they didn't ask for any pay.
Right.
Right? These guys who gave their lives and time but didn't want to be paid,
Right. Right.
So he married Anna,
Uh-huh.
and this is the origins of this Grail dynasty.
Right. Right. So why is it being kept secret?
Well,
or why is it not being
basically the
promoted?
Norman dynasty has no validity. If you actually look into the subject in depth, right, William the Conqueror had no bloodline to either the English or the Welsh throne.
Right.
His claim was that he had been promised that he could become king.
Right.
And he had been promised by Edward the Confessor. And you've got to ask yourself, well, what was Edward confessing? Yeah, Saint Edward the Confessor. What was he confessing? Well, it wasn't his sins. To confess something, yeah, means to state openly and to make a legal contract. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So his confession was that William should be his successor. That's why they have all coronations in front of Edward's tomb.
Yeah.
Because he's bearing witness. These are the guys that I've put on the throne.
So the current lot now that are the monarchs now, yeah, they're descended from William the Conqueror.
Yeah.
Right.
There have been other marriages since then.
Yes, there's other, but you would say that they had no right in the first place.
They had no right at that time other than conquest.
And that's why King Arthur dynasty would be...
is a threat.
Is a threat. Right. Are there other dynasties that would be a threat as well, or is that the main... Is it
well,
mainly
the Scottish dynasty.
Right.
At that time, I have to get this right, I think she was a great niece of Edward the Confessor, descended from a king called Edmund Ironside, I think that was his name, who was a half-brother of Edward the Confessor. Mm-hmm. And she fled to Scotland, Margaret, and married the King of Scotland, and took with her a very precious relic of the Holy Cross. And that's why the palace in Scotland is called Holy Rood Palace.
Right.
It's a fragment of the Holy Rood.
Right.
And this, I think, might be another link with Rosicrucianism.
Right.
Because the rose could be seen as being symbolic of the Tudor dynasty.
Right.
Yeah, the Tudor rose. And the cross of the Scottish dynasty.
Yeah. So
that when you had the marriage between one of the daughters of Henry VII with the King of Scotland, it brought the two together, and James I was descended from that. So there is another secret there, which I haven't explored in that book, but it is another link in that.
Yeah, it's my knowledge of history could be written on a postage stamp, Adrian, and but let's just come back to this idea that that certain things in history are a threat to the current lot.
Yes.
Right. That means that they must have some great minds looking into all of these. For example, did they know a lot of what's in this book before you researched it yourself and etc.? They must have some very well-informed people on history.
They maybe know things that I don't know.
Right.
And I should think I would be surprised if they don't. But one thing I do know is that Princess Diana is of the Arthur line. She's descended from the Sidneys.
Yeah, I was going to.
Do you want to do that?
Talk about that? Yeah. Because obviously, I'm not. I don't support the monarchy.
No.
I'm not. I don't believe in the monarchy.
No,
right?
fair enough.
And you've linked the Arthurian line to Prince William, right?
Yeah.
So were you doing them a favour, Adrian, or it's because could you not do that with millions of people?
Well, not millions of people are going to be King of England, are they?
No, but it's to me it's just a coincidence.
Well,
the fact that Lady Diana, you think you
I
can
don't think I know. I can prove it.
Yeah, you can trace that she's got some of that bloodline in her.
She's descended from the Courtier dynasty, but then it's mixed in with all of other.
But so's half of Wales, surely.
But the whole thing about the rose or the rose lineage is that you're hoping that you're going to get another bloom. Right now, not every you might be going to get some horrible sport that's no good at all. Right. But every now and then you get the odd bloom. It's like in a family, you know. Most of the children might be one lot. They're not very clever, not very bright, not very pretty. Then you get one that, that's a throwback to great aunt so-and-so.
Right.
Yeah. So the whole thing about the Grail dynasty is that they're descended from Joseph of Arimathea, and B, he's descended from King David. And the idea is that hopefully you're going to get a Messiah coming, the seed
yeah.
blossoms again, like with Jesus.
If you believe in all that nonsense.
Well, if you believe in that nonsense. But the whole thing in the Bible is that Jesus is descended from David.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to be the Messiah. He's going to be the one that's going to lead us out of trouble.
And it goes ultimately back to Abraham, or then Noah, isn't it? And
yeah, well, you can go back as far as you want. But David's the big one where royalty is concerned.
Right.
And I just find it interesting. I'm actually very disappointed with William. He seems a rather boring character from what I can tell. But maybe Harry.
Well, are you convinced
more promising.
Harry Hewitt.
Harry Hewitt, yeah.
What do you think of that theory, that Harry is not Charles's?
Well, you put the photographs together.
Yeah.
You make your own mind up. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a geneticist, but it would be interesting, wouldn't it? Because he's got the Diana lineage, but he hasn't got the other one, has he?
Yeah, and you nicely, you're very diplomatic, let's say, when you talk about the Diana, well, I call it an assassination, but when you talk about the death of Diana,
well, it's interesting.
You leave it open.
Well, I'm not convinced that she was the one they were after. I think that, when they're doing a card trick or, some magic, you try to distract the audience to look at the wrong thing. So all this focus on Diana, well, why did they kill her? Blah, blah, blah. I think it was Dodi they were after. If you think about this guy Dodi, right? A, he's the son of Muhammad al-Fayyad. And say what you like about Muhammad al-Fayyad, he's come from nowhere. He's I don't want to say too much, but let's say he's a suspect character, right? And he certainly doesn't like the royal family. Dodi, we all know, was a playboy, right? And he was planning to marry, so it would seem, Diana. And I don't know if you saw Muhammad al-Fayyad's shrine in Harrods, where they had the two glasses and the ring, her lipstick on the glass, all that. Forget that. What were they up to? And who might have wanted Dodi out of the way?
Right, yeah. So you think it might have been an assassination, but of Dodi rather than Diana?
That's my suspicion.
Okay. In an interview that I put out a few weeks ago, I was talking to a guy, and he said that that you have to fish through the Bible in order to find nuggets of truth or things that you want to identify with, but you can't say that it's all true, right? Because there's been so many different versions, etc. But this philosophy of being threatened by this line, or this Messiah is going to come back, as you just described, to me is fanciful thinking. It's not based on science or reality. Is it not a bit sick and perverted, the way that people look at these ancient books like the Bible or any religious book and change their behaviour based on things of the past, things that, okay, people, they did base their lives on it in the past, but we don't now. We are more enlightened. We have got access to more knowledge and information.
How esoteric do you want me to get?
Do you think there are people powerful people who are still influenced by all of this ancient knowledge and ideas in the Bible?
Let's take the gloves off, right? Let's get down to brass tacks.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
You've done a lot of research in your time into what we could call the nature of evil. Evil people doing terrible things.
Yeah.
Maddie McCann.
Yeah.
For a start. Now, you've got to think, what is a human being? Right? Now, if you're a materialist, you say, well, we're just animals. When you die, and that's it. Just like a dead pig. It's no different. But if you're a religious person, then you say, well, we're actually spirits living in flesh, having experiences. And we go through life after life, through reincarnation. Right? But the purpose, and if you read, I've studied Hermetica in detail, I've studied Egyptian religion in detail. And the idea of the concept that is taught there is that souls originally were with God. Right? God is pure love. But some of them rebelled. They wanted to do their own thing. They wanted to be creators in their own right. So they distanced themselves from God, and rebelled. And for that, they were cast down, the fall of the angels. But a way was created for them to get back, and that way was through incarnation on earth, so that they would go through experiences and they would learn that they must learn to love. And they must learn that actually we don't want to be going that way, we want to be going that way, back home. This is what all spiritual teachers teach.
Yeah.
But there are also discarnate entities who've not incarnated, who don't want that to happen, and who are deliberately corrupting the human race all the time. And they can take over certain people and get them to do terrible things. And so someone like Adolf Hitler, for instance, the classic, he was not just a monster, he was a possessed monster.
I've very rarely used the word evil in my presentations. I do think that you can take any person and look at their behaviour, and often you can find a reason why they're behaving in certain modus operandi, why that person, let's say, seems evil or has done this. Might be something in their childhood, might be something that they've experienced. I think that I don't like to I'm not making excuses for people, but I think that you can look at any person and normally find a plausible motive why they're acting in that way. You can act in that way, but the spiritual view, is that what you do unto others will be done unto you, which is, we normally call that the law of karma. And so you're going through these lives, one after another, and what you want to be doing is to be paying off your debt, your karma, so you can get back up the ladder, as it were. But you've got someone else pulling you down the other way, trying to make it worse for you. So you kill someone, you're going to get killed, unless you can find a way of repentance to get over that without that happening. So evil tends to perpetuate itself. That's how we see things like ISIS happening in Syria, the terrible things being done there. But there's even more to it than that, but this isn't the time really to go into that. But so the idea of Jesus, I think, let's just say first, Adrian, I think when you make any claim of someone being evil, I think you really have to have a look at all of the evidence to see if the evil's not coming from somewhere else and manipulating that person, or mind control. There's all different ways why someone might have ended in. The evil is sometimes hidden.
Well, I think people are taken over by it, and they can certainly buy into a group energy and do terrible things they wouldn't do or wouldn't have done had they not become part of a cult, say, or a political movement that has that as its agenda.
So do you believe, because I don't think the Bible specifies reincarnation, although I believe it used to.
It used to, yeah.
Right. So you would prefer the earlier version?
Yeah. Right. I think that's one of the things that got squeezed out.
Right, yeah.
That the early Christians understood about reincarnation.
Right.
That's why Jesus says that John the Baptist was Elijah. He's the later reincarnation of Elijah.
And is this reinforced by your research into Egyptology then?
Yes.
Right, yeah, which we'll talk about in another discussion.
Yeah.
Right. So how confident are you that we reincarnate and get a new? Do we get a new body immediately, or do we hang around for a while? Or
I can't tell you how long it takes, but I can tell you I remember some of my lives.
Really? Right. So you're convinced that?
I'm convinced that I've lived before.
Right. All right.
And I've met plenty of people who are also convinced that they've lived before.
Right. Do you think it could ever be proved?
I think when you die, you remember it. But the reason you don't remember it is because
when you die, you remember what?
What you've done before and your previous lives, and what you've done this one and how you got on. There's a whole judgment thing goes on. But the reason you don't remember it is because you have to be given a chance in this life
Right.
to learn the lessons that this one's about.
Right.
If you were thinking all the time, well, I used to be King so-and-so, or, you know, or alternatively, well, I was the guy who swept the street, you know, why am I now a prince, you know? Your soul wants to have certain lessons, and it's put you into a situation where you're going to have those lessons. And at different times in your life, you're actually going to meet specific people who are going to help you on that path or hinder you. And it all is down to you then, how you exercise your free will, because you have a relative free will here. That's the other important thing about the earth and having a body, that it gives you energy from your food instead of having to be connected to the energy coming down from higher up.
Which we will talk about
Yeah.
in another
Which is all to
interview.
do with the game with the Holy Grail, but this is a whole other story.
Sorry?
This is all connected with the Holy Grail.
Right.
The Holy Grail is the idea of re-establishing the connection with God's love.
Right, well, just ask me then. You're saying then that you need certain people of certain genetic lines in order to do that. Is that?
I'm not saying that necessarily. I'm saying
is
that,
that not
it's a hope
right?
that someone's going to pop up that's going to be the special one. Yeah.
You don't.
It's-
See, I find that hard to
Yeah, well, it
agree
doesn't
with.
matter anyway, because, I mean, the reality is that it might be someone else entirely who is of that line, but he was just the guy that was sweeping the street. Yeah, Jesus the carpenter's son, you know. He wasn't living in a palace, but he evidently had the lineage. So
So, do you think then that people in positions of power believe that the lineage to these characters in the Bible is really, really important, or do you think they're just using the Bible or using that?
depends who they are.
Right.
There are some who are adepts. There are some who are black magicians.
Right.
And the black magicians want to manipulate situations so that they don't have to face up to what they've done. And they feed off other people. But that's a whole other subject, you know. That's what the whole thing about vampires and so on is all about.
Yeah, I can identify with that. Some people seem to.
Some people are, you know, they have either themselves or something else that's living in them. If you read the New Testament, Jesus is always casting out evil spirits. You know, that's not me inventing this; it's all in there. You might say, "Well, that's bloody nonsense." Yeah, he didn't know enough about psychology. You might say that, but it's a different perspective, and it's, I think, that we are being misled when we dismiss all that, because there's nothing the devil likes more than for us to think he's a joke. Yeah.
All right. On that note, thank you, Adrian, and we'll.
You decide what you're going to put in of all that.
All right.
Possibly going a bit off track, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm ready for a beer.